I was at the Children's Hospital at Hackney, which is, I think, called Queen Elizabeth Hospital. And I was there, my first job was a junior casualty officer. It's a very fundamental thing, this thought of somebody being trampled to death. I mean, it's another thing you could think of them being burnt to death, for instance. But these were not, there was no question of that. They were actually human beings who had trodden on other human beings. They were completely trapped. They could not escape from this staircase. We just received one dead body after another. And I can remember very well opening one of the doors of the doctor's consulting rooms and saying, you know, let's put the bodies in here. Just stack them, roll them off the stretchers. You couldn't possibly have casualty littered with bodies. And these bodies were sort of obviously asphyxiated. They were sort of pale lilac in colour. But it was perfectly obvious that the women were actually trapped. I mean, many of them, it was interesting how many of them had their arms in this sort of position. And I think it was because, A, they were holding the children, or their bedding, or something. And they were so cramped, if you understand my meaning, that they couldn't presumably extract their arms. When you stop to think about it, it really was simply horrific. But one of the serious things was the ambulance men, who usually were sort of so sensible and cooperative about things, they were quite hysterical also. Afterwards, when I thought about it, I realised that it was because their wives and children spent the night in that shelter. And they all knew exactly where the disaster was. So the bodies were moved. I can remember hearing the sound of the vehicles that came to fetch them. Because, I mean, they had to go somewhere to be identified. So the rest of the night we were there working. And ultimately the next morning we were told that we could go off duty for 24 hours. This is the two students and myself. And that we weren't to tell anybody. And they made it quite clear that we were absolutely sworn to silence. And I think that had a very bad effect, generally, I mean, on many people. Because I can remember very well ringing my mother, who at that stage lived in Streatham, and the next morning I told her, you know, that I had a terrible night and been dealing with casualties and absolutely nothing had happened to me. I was perfectly all right. Because I thought instinctively that it would be on the radio, not television in those days, but the radio. And of course nothing was mentioned. And I never actually, for the rest of her life, I never told her what happened. Because I actually was so shocked. And I didn't tell anybody or speak about it for 50 years.